I'd like to welcome everybody to the Assembly Committee on Ways and Means and Senate Committee of Finance Subcommittee on General Government. Let's call this meeting to order. And can the Secretary please take the roll? Secretary in the room?
Sorry, there we go. Senator Brooks.
Thank you.
Here.
Senator Dennis.
Here.
Senator Gokachia.
Here.
Assemblywoman Gorlo.
Here.
Assemblyman Hafen. Assemblywoman Howdigi.
Here.
Assemblyman Levitt.
Here.
Assemblywoman Miller.
Here.
And Chair Peters.
Here, thank you. And would you please mark Assemblyman Hafen present when he arrives? There he is. Thank you. I just want to go over a couple of housekeeping things. We've been doing this for a minute, but wanted to make sure everyone had access. We today do not have access to the Zoom chat, so please, if you have questions, direct them via Skype or raise your hand in the meeting, and I will try and acknowledge you. If I miss you, please don't hesitate to shout out and say, hey. We are obviously online, but members of the public can access our meeting via our YouTube channel or the links on the legislative website. If you would like to make public comment, you may access that via the Nellis program and sign up on today's meeting page. And I just want to remind presenters that as you are speaking, would you please remember to say your name clearly for the secretary in the record. Let's see, I think I covered everything. So on today's agenda, the subcommittee is going to hear the Department of Business and Industry's first budget. We are hearing from the Director's Office of Administration, and then, and budgets from Insurance, Industrial Relationships, and or Relations, and the Real Estate Division. And I'm going to go ahead, unless I missed anything, go ahead and ask Director Reynolds to go ahead and begin the presentation.
Thank you, Chair Peters. This is Terry Reynolds. I'm the Director for the Department of Business and Industry. As the Chair indicated, we're going to go through 4 of our divisions. Actually, the Director's Office, the Administrative Account, Division of Insurance, Division of Industrial Relations, and 2 budget accounts for real estate, and then education and research. Lisa, if you can get the slides up.
If you give me a moment, it's not going up. My test run worked fine, but hold on a second, okay?
All right.
And Director Reynolds, I just wanted to let you know that my intention is to ask questions after every budget. If you don't mind stopping between budgets so we can do that.
That would be great.
Great, thank you.
Ms. Figueroa, this is broadcast. If you can open it on your screen, if you can open the file, the presentation first, and then go to share screen, you should be able to pick the file.
I really did. Hang on. Are you able to see it now?
We are not currently.
Okay.
Let's walk through it together. Hit the share screen button in Zoom. And do you see your presentation? There should be an option for various files that you can share.
I am seeing Director Reynolds, which is before when I clicked on it, it brought me up to my presentation.
So share screen, you've hit share screen and you should have screen 1. I don't know how many screens you have, but I have screen 1, screen 2, and a variety of files I can share.
Okay.
I see that. There we go.
Sorry about that.
We can see the budget. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to remind presenters to please say your name for the record.
I apologize, Lisa Figueroa with the Department of Business and Industry, Chief Financial Officer.
Thank you. This is Terry Reynolds again, Director for the Department of Business and Industry. Just wanted to kind of go through, and I'll go through this rather quickly. As you know, the Department of Business and Industry has 4 major areas: commerce and capital regulation. Today we'll be looking at insurance and real estate under that function. We also have community development and small business. We will actually not be getting into too much of that. We'll talk about our director's office, which also houses the Office of Business Finance and Planning. Under labor and workforce protection, we'll be going and looking at the budget for industrial relations. In addition to that, under advocacy and advancement, in the director's office, I'm going to highlight and talk about our consumer affairs unit under that. So with that, we can go to the next slide. First of all, I wanted to kind of lay some groundwork for our discussion today. The Department of Business and Industry, for our general fund, only 4.5% of our entire budget are funded by the general fund. And that funds a portion of the director's office. It funds a portion of the real estate division, actually about 50% of the real estate division, because half of that is fee funded, which deals with common interest communities. The remainder of that is funded by the general fund for real estate. In addition to that, the Office of the Labor Commissioner is also funded by the general fund. We were tasked by the Governor's Finance Office to basically cut 23% of our general fund budgets, and that amounted to cuts of $1,030,415. That was a difficult task for us. I'd like to tell you that we had to make some very tough decisions. We did make cuts, but we did not have to have any layoffs. Positions were either vacant or the incumbents were transferred to vacant positions. So to kind of go through those cuts under consumer affairs, we cut $261,559. Some of that will be in the budget recommendations will be coming back, but Commission on Minority Affairs, we had cut the operating on that by $11,856. The Office of Business Finance and Planning, $89,800. A lot of that was using our bond funds to assist paying for those functions that were done by our management analyst and program officer. Under the Office of Labor Commissioner, we cut out $263,728. Under the real estate division, probably the largest cuts we had were $403,481. So there were some significant cuts that we had to basically propose to make the goal of the request of 23% of our general fund agencies. Next slide. I'm going to go through Consumer Affairs Unit. It is a small unit to begin with. We have basically, we had 6.5 positions within that. They actually spend a lot of time on 3 areas. One is basically working with the Fight Fraud Task Force, especially in Southern Nevada. They investigate cases and they try to educate consumers. We do work in close contact with the Attorney General's office and we work with them to prosecute cases for deceptive trade practices. Most of our cases involve seniors and or what I would say are underrepresented public that don't have attorneys, that get caught up in scams or fraud, and we help them recover their monies back they spent for products that really are not what they were represented to be. So occasionally we get into large circumstances of fraud that are happening nationwide, and that's not uncommon today. Under that, you can see under advocacy and protection how the calls come in or how the inquiries come in, and we've broken that down for you. This was requested, I think, when we discussed this the last when we did the initial presentation of the budget. But most of our inquiries come in via phone and email. We do get referrals from the Attorney General's office and the Fight Fraud Task Force and our community partners. Here's a breakdown of cases, and I supplied the LCB and the GFO with kind of the breakdown of cases, and you can see that they cover a lot of areas. This year, 2020 was very busy. We had approximately about 500 additional cases to deal with than we usually do because of COVID. So for the Department of Business and Industry budget count for the Director's Office, most of our increases were the biennial increase of 258,996 is primarily due to cost of living adjustments. What we're looking at is under consumer fraud, the Consumer Affairs Unit, is to remove the expiration date, and this unit has sunsetted every biennium, and so we'd like to see that not happen anymore, not have to every biennium go in and argue to do that. I think they're a very effective unit. They have about a 92 to 93% clearance rate of all the cases that come in to it. So this also reinstates the expiring operational budgets. It reduces the ALJ, the attorney law judge that we have, from full-time to 50%. And we looked at the caseload that we have with that administrative law judge, and we feel that 50% half-time position would be very able to handle the caseload that we have. This also eliminates one full-time and one part-time administrative assistant. We were able to, in the Director's Office in Southern Nevada, we were able to move the full-time position within the office there to help us with payroll. And the half-time assistant actually was a new mother and decided to stay home. So we're not replacing that position. It continues the video and conferencing subscription that we use for our virtual meetings. It reinstates the Commission on Minority Affairs travel budget. It replaces equipment, computers, server, and conferencing equipment that we have under our normal schedule. It transfers an IT position too from Taxi Cab Authority. As you know, Taxi Cab is undergoing some significant budget issues because of the drop in revenue with the trip revenue from taxi cabs. We only have one IT professional right now at the State Business Center to serve 9 different agencies. And so this will be really helpful to all of our agencies there. That'll be cost allocated to our different agencies to be able to serve them in the State Business Center. So that really ends the overall presentation for the Director's Office administrative budget 4681. So happy to take any questions on that.
Thank you, Director. I do have a couple of questions, and I'm going to go ahead and start with Assemblywoman Gorlow, please.
Thank you, Chair Peters, and thank you for being here today. I want to talk real quick about the Consumer Affairs workload and the increase in cases. I understand COVID had a lot to do with the increase in cases in 2020, but could you elaborate on any other issues that may have caused an increase?
Thank you for that question, Simon Gorlo. It is, we average, go back and forth, we average about 2,200 to 2,300 cases a year. A lot of those depend on what's happening in the economy or problems in the economy. We used to get huge amounts of telemarketing, but now we're seeing like moving and storage. We always see a lot of cases with communications companies with selling for everything from iPhones or different types of phones to different types of plans for consumers to pick up for communications. Auto body and repair is a big issue. Home repairs, and a lot of people were home during COVID, and so they're doing home repairs, and I think that attributed to an increase on that. Internet, a lot of scams and issues over the internet. So they're always varied, and there's no real how do I say this? There's no real trend in one area, but we are seeing the fact that with COVID, there was a lot of people home. They were doing home projects. They spent more time, on the internet, ordering products or ordering everything from food to daily necessities over the internet. So we saw a little bit of rise in that. But generally, these types of things are fairly stable and they're fairly predictable in terms of the areas.
Quick follow-up, Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Do you anticipate that these trends will continue in the next biennium? And if so, and consumer affairs isn't continued, how would those cases be handled then?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do think that the trend will continue. We have handled anywhere from 2,500 cases to a high of 3,000 cases. We're down, we're right in the average, and I still think those will continue. How is it going to be handled if we get into this unit, if it goes away? First of all, I would say that the Attorney General's office really only handles more criminal cases or large civil cases. And as I said, these are cases that involve people that are really, this is their kind of last resort to come to us and get those cases handled, or seniors. We try to educate people not to get into these types of situations, but they happen. Scams and fraud happens from time to time, especially in poor economic times. We see more cases happen. So I think this unit is extremely important. They have a high degree of effectiveness, 90+% of the cases they take on. And I think the individuals would really have nowhere else to go. I think the AG's office would handle it, but before they looked at the cost benefit ratio of trying to be able to handle the smaller types of cases. And frankly, it's really tough on them to keep that up and then handle the large cases that they do, more criminal and large civil cases that they're involved in. So I think this is kind of a last resort for a lot of people to be able to recover monies that were taken from them by deceptive trade practices.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate all that you're doing for Nevada residents. So thank you.
Thank you. And I think I have a follow-up question from Senator Dennis.
Yeah, thank you. That last question, I got to thinking, it used to be that we had this huge consumer affairs unit that had a lot of people and were handling a lot of cases. And then we, as a state, we just decided to just get rid of it for budget and other reasons. So if we really want to know what happens if we don't fund this, we can look at those years where we didn't have really consumer affairs, and it was the Attorney General's office that we had to rely on, and they only worked on the big cases. So all of our constituents that had these little cases, it was harder to help them. And so my question had to do with how long is it taking to resolve these? I know they're all different, but how long does it take you to resolve? And of the, what would you say, 3,000 or 5,000 cases that you have in a year, are you able to resolve most of those?
Senator Dennis, Terry Reynolds for the record. Thank you for that question. That's a very good question. We average probably 2,500 to 3,000 cases a year. We're right in that track record right now. We resolve about 92 to 93% of all of our cases, and we actually annually return about 250,000 to 300,000 a year back to consumers that have been defrauded. It's taking longer because of more cases we have and less people in the office. So we're looking at probably a 2 to 3 week, previously 2 to 3 week resolution. And now we're probably looking at 4 to 6 weeks to be able to get that done. And that's the downside of having less people and higher caseloads in the unit. But we're still resolving them, still being effective, and still getting the same resolution rate as we had before, just taking a long time.
Yeah, sounds like we need to get you some additional help so you can catch up. So, okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I have a little bit of a follow-up to that related to the proposal for maintaining the 2 vacant administrative assistant positions. Can you talk about how maintaining those positions would potentially affect the resolution of customer complaints timeline?
Thank you. Terry Reynolds, Director for BNI. So when cases come in, they generally come in, as you saw, by phone or email. And so the administrative assistants really help prep and work on the cases so that our investigators can work on those cases. So the workload is going to go up. It's going to take a little longer. We're getting staff. Some of the investigators are going to be taking the calls and then helping prep on that. Statistical analysis too. We put everything into what we call eyesight, our software system, so we can track those cases. It's very important for us so we can generate statistics, so we can know if there are trends and what areas we need to concentrate on. So that's the downside of not having the administrative assistants. Frankly, if we were able to reinstate some positions, it would be the full-time administrative assistant positions within in the Southern Nevada office, because that person is really invaluable. The person that had that position is still there and can provide that knowledge, still working in the office, but in a different section in the office. So it's not like we lost the person, they're still there, but still it would be good to reinstate if we were able to do that in the future. That would be the one that we would want to see happen.
Thank you for that. Now, I have another question here from Assemblywoman Miller.
Thank you, Chair Peters. Director, my questions are regarding the reducing of the administrative law judge position down to a half-time or part-time status, and obviously the concerns that it may have on the impact of the consumer complaints. So my first question is, on average, how many investigations actually lead to administrative hearings or alternative dispute resolution proceedings?
Okay. Terry Reynolds, for the record, thank you for the question. We only see probably, well, in the context for consumer affairs, we only see probably 4 to 5, high of 6 or 7 cases a year. Most of the cases, the investigations we do and are resolved with our staff and within our staff working to basically mediate those issues with the wrong party and the business or the person involved in that. Very few of these actually go to a caseload. In addition to that, what you're not seeing here is that we have cases that will be involved with mortgage lending or financial institutions or real estate, where the ALJ will step in. Those cases will probably have to have, we have attorneys from our insurance division, or they're trained in administrative process, or attorneys from our labor commissioner office to be able to handle those. So we are able to shift some of that workload. So a 50% person, and we've had a lot of interest in that, because there's a lot of attorneys that want to basically work part-time on that, senior attorneys that are actually very experienced. So I think they will be able to handle the workload. I don't think we would have made that recommendation if we felt that it would seriously impact that area. And I think the trends are showing that we can handle that with a half-time person. Keep in mind that we had to make a 23% reduction in our general fund, which is very, very difficult. And but we looked at what our workloads were, how effective we could be with a part-time person, and we think we can handle the workload with that.
Okay, so it sounds like that you don't anticipate it would have a huge impact because of the small volume right now. It also sounds like you're saying that right now, because I understand that the position's actually vacant, that you have other attorneys from other agencies pitching in and helping with that workload. Is that correct?
Terry Reynolds, for the record, yes, that is correct. Not the best circumstance, but yes, that's correct, and that's how we're handling it. And I'm hoping that when we get this halftime position, that'll relieve the direction of cases off to other attorneys within our other divisions.
One final question, because I know that we are right now, everyone, there's a lot of reduction happening, and we see the trends are decreasing in so many areas, but also the trends are decreasing because of COVID and because of, we're not fully up and running yet as a state, so to speak. So are there any concerns that the trend could change eventually as the state and the economy fully opens and comes back, that maybe they would increase? And if so, if this need increases, is there a plan to adjust and adapt to that increase if necessary?
Terry Reynolds, for the record, thank you for that question, because that's something that we're looking at very strongly. For example, timeshares, we know, and we'll get into that in later discussion, but timeshare industry, we feel will be picking back up within the fall because of the COVID issues going down, and more people having more confidence to come and visit our state. And so we're looking at that. With that, though, comes areas of consumer fraud and scams, and as the economy gets better. So we're concerned that probably by late next fiscal year, we're going to have to be looking at some adjustments. So we are looking at where we're at in those trends. We work with GoEd in terms of looking at their financial numbers, companies coming in, where the economy's headed, and trying to look at where we'll be within the next year. So a little bit of a crystal ball, but we think that things will pick up probably in the second or third quarter of the next fiscal year.
Okay, thank you, Director, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? I'm looking at gallery to see if there are hands. Okay, looks like we're good. If you want to move on to the next budget, please.
Great. The next one we have is Division of Insurance, and I'm going to let Commissioner Richardson take that over. Thank you.
Morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Division is presenting its main operating budget for this particular presentation, and that's budget account 3813. 3813 is primarily funded by assessments against entities and individuals that are regulated by the division. Some of these assessments are based on specific amounts that are set forth in NRS 680C, and the remainder are funded through tiered assessments that are paid by authorized insurance companies. And this is all based on the premium written by those companies in Nevada. I'm not focusing on the initial slide, just so you know, so you can move to the next slide, only because I was just trying to make sure that you had a base understanding of what the insurance division does in that base slide. So back to the budget itself, I just wanted to chat about the assessment amounts. So you'll notice the assessment amounts for 2019 in our budget was $3,432,000 or $3,400,000. And we had no change in our tiering structure. However, the 2020 tiered assessment ended up totaling $3,492,400. So this type of change happens either because new companies come into the market or the tiered allocation for a company may change as its premiums rise or fall. The most significant change in our budget from the last biennium to this upcoming biennium is that in the 2019 session in SB 86, the industry actually requested an increase in the fraud assessment to double the amount. So the fraud program is funded by assessments against insurance carriers based on the premium written in the state by each insurer. So the DOI collects the funds and the assessment revenue is shared with the Attorney General's office. The AG's office receives 85% of the funding and the division retains 15%. So in 2020, we collected approximately, or we're going to be collecting, or we did collect, I should say, 2.4 million versus 2019, which was 1.2 for this particular fraud assessment. So you'll notice in our budget, we're really only asking for one enhancement. So the proposed budget includes the one enhancement request for asking to replace a server for each of the biennium years for approximately $7,000 each. But of note, you'll see that our enhancement for computer equipment request didn't propose to replace the computers in FY22 and 23. Instead, the division was able to use federal grant funds under the CARES COVID relief allowance to purchase 38 laptops at the end of 2020. So these laptops have been assigned to staff, and they're going to further the division's goal for efficiency and reduce paper environment. Due to the COVID pandemic and the state's move to teleworking, we've seen increased and improved use of electronic processes. And we've encouraged the staff to also embrace and make moves to increase the use of their interactions with consumers and increase their interactions with insurance carriers using virtual meetings, increased database. And this has made a significant reduced reliance on paper. There's no printing allowed. We've really pushed off all of those things. And the plan is to try to continue this when staff return to the office. So internally, the staff that are here are helping us clean up old files to make sure that when folks come back in the door, there is no change in their environment from working at home to working here in the office. And all that being said, you're going to see that the division's budget reflects a biennium increase in operations of $3,945,224 over the FY 2021. So this increase is mainly due to that fraud assessment that I've already noted earlier. It also brought in 86, also SB 86 also brought in 2 new fraud positions that were not included in the 2021 base budget. And I can answer any questions. The other thing I just wanted you to know of note is that we have 3 BDRs this year. So the first one is AB4, the Insurance Guarantee Association for the PNC market. And then we have SB 18, which is a consumer protection bill, especially for auto consumers. And then our omnibus bill, which is AB 45. And I stand for any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions on this particular budget item? Well, I just want to say I'm looking forward to your bills. I think very interesting, and thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, I think we can move into the next budget unless I missed anybody's questions. Okay, let's go ahead and move into the next budget.
Excuse me. This is Terry Reynolds, Director for the Department of Business and Industry. Our next budget is the Division of Industrial Relations, and Administrator Victoria Carrion is available to discuss that budget.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Victoria Carrion for the record. I'm the Administrator at the Division of Industrial Relations. The budget before you today is our 4680 budget, which is for our administration and our workers' compensation section. Just to give you an overall view of what the division does, we work together to put safety and health first for all of Nevada. And this particular budget has our administration, which oversees our 5 sections within the division, which includes workers' compensation, occupational safety and health administration, our Nevada OSHA program, our safety consultation and training section, also known as SCATS, mine safety and training, and our mechanical compliance section, which handles elevators and boilers. So that administration includes our administrative staff, as well as our legal office and our information technology staff. And then the workers' compensation section is where the bulk of the FTE is for this budget. And that section regulates Nevada's workers' compensation programs to ensure that injured workers receive timely and accurate delivery of benefits. So we can go on to the next slide. So our budget is essentially flat. We are funded by the Workers' Compensation and Safety Fund, which is primarily funded by an assessment on workers' compensation insurers. The only increase in our budget is due to cost of living and salary adjustments. We have 73 positions. The major changes in our budget include a change due to Senate Bill 55 related to employee leasing companies. This bill will transfer employee leasing companies from the Division of Industrial Relations to the Division of Insurance. It has been heard in the Senate Commerce and Labor Committee, which amended the bill to actually place the responsibility in the Labor Commissioner. So that will be pending on the Senate floor, that amendment. So E225, which you see is eliminate oversight fee recognized in Division of Insurance. That is actually the transfer of the revenue from the employee leasing companies to the Division of Insurance. Should it actually go to the Labor Commissioner, an appropriate change would be made, but the revenue would no longer be in the Division of Industrial Relations. And to give you a sense of the amount, it's about $114,000. And our remaining changes in our budget deal with replacement of computers and servers based on the regular replacement schedules. And I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have a couple of questions from Senator Brooks, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Mine's around E225, and I want to know the primary reason for the oversight of employee leasing companies to be transferred to another agency within the department.
Thank you for the question. This is Victoria Carrion, the Administrator at the Division of Industrial Relations. The primary reason for that was that the review of those applications involves review of some financial statements, and we felt that another division within Department of Business and Industry could more adequately do that function, whereas our staff has expertise in enforcement of the workers' compensation laws.
This is Terry Reynolds, Director, and I wanted to add to that. Senator Brooks, thank you for that question. I think it's important to note that we had a discussion between the Office of Labor Commissioner, the Insurance Commissioner, and the Administrator for DIR, and looking at the most efficient way to be able to handle that. And the agency with the most experience in dealing with that issue of employee leasing companies, which already employ companies and employee agencies are already reviewed and administered by the Office of Labor Commissioner. We felt that moving that over to the Office of Labor Commissioner was the best way to handle that. The office is also able to handle the review. They do that on public works projects and different projects to make sure that, and they audit labor firms to make sure that they're paying the wages, the correct wages on that. In addition to that, we felt that, and there's no offense to the DIR, but there wasn't really a lot of work that was done. Cases that they felt where there was an issue were referred to the Attorney General's office. they really weren't doing a lot of follow-up on those. And so we didn't see a lot of case investigation work, where I think if you take it over to the Office of Labor Commissioner, you'll see more investigative work and more control and regulation of that area. So I think it will benefit both by having the knowledge, both by having the investigative staff to be able to handle the cases that they're most knowledgeable with, and companies that are involved in that. So the Office of Labor Commissioner looked at what was happening nationally with that and how it was handled. And we feel that that was probably the best way to do it. And that's why we are suggesting an amendment to the bill. But we feel that it'll be handled better within the Office of Labor Commissioner than it was within DIR.
Well, thank you for expanding upon that, and that, which brings me to my next question. If this is approved, what does that do for your workload, and what's that staff who's currently doing that? What does that do to their duties?
Thank you for the question. This is Victoria Cadillon for the record. And in terms of our current staff allocation, it's about 0.4 of an FTE. Not doing this function will allow us to concentrate on enforcement of workers' compensation laws. So this function is currently handled within our workers' compensation enforcement unit. So we have a very large caseload of workers' compensation enforcement, especially with the economic downturn. So we will easily be able to utilize our staff fully for that.
That answers my question. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the committee members? Don't see anybody. All right. Well, I think we can move on to the next budget then. You are on mute, Director Reynolds.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Chair Peters. The next budget we're going to go through, this Terry Reynolds for the record, is the Real Estate Division, and our administrator, Sharaf Chandra, is available to review that. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Reynolds. Good morning, members of the committee, Madam Chair, Sharaf Chandra, Administrator for the Real Estate Division. Again, this slide is just an overview, so I'll go over the two budget accounts that we are currently under your consideration. So the first budget account is the Real Estate Administrative account. This primarily supports the licensing function of the division. So the previous slide summarizes the number of licensees the division oversees. So essentially it consists of 5 distinct sectors of the marketplace, each with varying licensees and sector concerns. So essentially you'll see real estate has salespersons, brokers, broker salespersons, property managers. So that consists of the bulk of the real estate. Then we have builders, developers, timeshares, appraisers, energy auditors, inspectors of structures. So, grand total, almost little over 40,000 licensees that come under the real estate administrative account. And then the other account that we're going to look at is the educational department. And this, again, serves as the hub for all real estate education, training, and information. So we'll move to the next slide, which is essentially talking about the budget account 3823, which is essentially the bulk of the administrative account for the real estate division. Again, the FY 22-23, you'll see there's a increase, but essentially all of that increase is due to the cost of living salary adjustments, attorney general cost allocations, and the only enhancement, and if you look at the budget enhancements for 26.26 positions, again, Director Reynolds previewed some of the cuts that we took during the last FY 2021 cycle. Again, so the biggest thing here is the E550 licensing management software, and that's the one that the division is looking to get. We have a system that was approved, I believe, in the 2003-2005 legislative session. So it's been over 15 years. And so that's the software licensing platform that we want to replace. And that's really the only enhancement on that. Again, the 26.6 positions, just as a backdrop, when the 2010 crisis happened and we went into a recession, our positions at that time were 32. And so we've maintained at 26.6 positions all since 2010. The next budget account that we wanted to talk about briefly was the 3826 account, which is the real estate education account. This one, right now, the budget proposes elimination of an administrative assistant 1 and an administrative assistant 2. And again, the other addition to this is an education software database. Again, we feel like if we could get a database that helps streamline the process a little more. A lot of this is educational packets coming in that have to be reviewed, audits have to happen, education instructors have to be reviewed, their qualifications have to be reviewed, and also sponsors that put in for these courses are also reviewed. And so having a database could streamline the process a lot more and take off a little bit of the burden on the staff that currently are, quite frankly, a little stretched. So those are the two budget accounts in front of you. I'll stop and take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have quite a few questions, and I'm going to go ahead and kick us off with the first question. We know that there was an LCB audit that I think was published in September of last year. And I would just like for you to provide a status update on the progress of implementing those audit recommendations, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sharat Chandra for the Real Estate Division Administrator. So the audit, most of the findings for the audit, we have been able to work through. So one of the concerns was that there was, a reconciliation issue, and so we resolved that. But some of the bigger ones have to kind of tie back into the software and the lack of us being able to reconcile our platform with the financial platform, because the operating software does licensing, it does timeshares, it does education, it does compliance. And so taking that one and try to integrate it with a financial system and the reporting, a lot of it is done manually. The director's office assists us with that. And so I think a big key to that is technology. And so that's where we're struggling. We can do a lot of those things, but it takes extensive manual processes. And again, with the current staffing and the resources, that is where the biggest challenge is. And especially there was a section there that had 4 or 5 recommendations, which in our opinion is just one big recommendation. So it is how the compliance section audits brokers. And so the question was, well, why don't you audit every broker that has a trust account? Well, that is doable, but resource hungry operation. And so traditionally what the division has done is it's focused on an area that we believe could be the most vulnerable for fraud. And so it was on people that did property management. And so we focused on property managers. We made sure that we got trust accounts from them, and there's a process to review it. And quite honestly, the people that do this, we've got administrative assistants that are working so hard trying to do this, and which really should be an auditor, someone with some financial background. And so what we've tried to do is try to do the best to streamline it, to make it as effective as possible. But does that check every box? Probably not. But that is kind of the challenge that we faced with. And we understand there's a responsibility for consumers. And I think the division has really gone to extremes to try to make sure that we ensure that there's compliance and also some public protection. So that's kind of the background on the audit. I believe most of the other recommendations that the audit have were valid. We've worked on solutions for all of that. Debt collection, reconciliations, those are doable, and we've already almost finished most of them. This one was the biggest challenge, and we've made some recommendations in there that says, I think we can achieve all of the things that they want. We may not be able to do it exactly the way they want it, but I think the results will pretty much be the same. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I have some additional questions from Assemblywoman and Vice Chair Howdegate, please.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the presentation. I do have still some more questions in the audit area. You answered one of my questions regarding whether there was budgetary constraints in regards to meeting some of the audit recommendations. But first, I want to, you mentioned having an auditor to help, or needing an auditor there to help. But I know that the auditor actually made the recommendation that you wouldn't need an auditor to actually help implement the recommendations, that they actually gave you a recommendation of using, I believe it was, I read through the audit and the recommendations, and let me see if I can find my notes. An attestation form to actually fill that. So did you guys give any thought to the recommendation that came from the auditor, where he identified that you really didn't need an auditor to help with this, that a simple attestation form could be utilized?
Shraddha Chandra, Administrator for the Real Estate Division. Thank you for that question, Madam Vice Chair. Yes, we currently have a process in there that requires them to submit either a 546 form or 546A, which says either they have a trust account or not. But also, I think it's something that's implementable. Again, the question always is, you take in this information, and then the question is, what do you do about it? And so really the challenge is, we get into self-attestation, but then really the challenge is that audit. So the self-attestation comes in, but what have you done to verify that that is actually true or not? And so that's always been the challenge with us. We get the trust account reconciliations, or we get a form that says, I don't have a trust account, and so hence that's the form. And so that process is in place. Now the question really is, how are we reviewing these trust accounts? Are we going back and doing a financial audit? Are we looking at just some red flags? And thereby, then that triggers an audit or a request for more information. So I think some of those recommendations were already in place. It may not have been as clean as they'd expected, and we made those adjustments. But really, the larger recommendation was, hey, why don't you do it for everybody? And the challenge was, that's possible, but we need a lot more help to do that. But in a limited basis, yes, we can absolutely do it. And we've actually worked on that process to make it a much more cleaner. And so I don't know if that answers your question fully, but part of that recommendation was taken, and yes.
Okay, thank you. And I know it's just that, like, I know in the executive budget, there isn't any enhancements or recommendations for extra personnel. So I was just, I'm worried about how you're gonna get through the recommendations from the audit with just the staff that you have, because there isn't any, recommendations or enhancements for extra personnel. So, but also, maybe if you could just touch on that a little bit. And then I know there's a need for technology enhancements and system enhancements. And I did see that in the executive budget, there is a recommendation for a one-shot appropriation for that licensing system upgrade. So is that enough, or will that system upgrade be what you need to fully, comply with the recommendations?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Shraddha Chandra, Administrator for the Real Estate Division. I think that will greatly help. I think what it'll do is it'll give us a better platform to kind of consolidate some of the data. Some of the reports can be uploaded, and that way, maybe a report could be generated much more seamlessly. And so, yes, it's going to create a situation where that would probably enable us to create a different process to go a little more deeper into the audits, or maybe expand the audit a little more to require folks to turn in additional documents. But yes, I don't want to say that's the smoking gun that'll solve all our problems, but I think having that in place would greatly enhance the efficiencies that we can work on.
This is Terry Reynolds, the director. Let me supplement that a little bit. Unfortunately, we have never been able to get back to our, when we had the recession and we lost a considerable amount of positions in real estate. Actually, our volume of licensees we're just about where we were before the recession came in. So I think we were at like 42,000, and so we're close to 41,000 licensees right now. So we're generating quite a bit of revenue, but unfortunately, this is a general fund agency, this portion of that. And so we're competing with other general fund areas within the state, education, healthcare, and those areas. And so this really begs for, in the future, for real estate to be self-funded. And I think we have discussed that with the real estate associations. They would like to see that. This would allow us to build up a reserve and be able to handle the kind of the cyclical times that we have within the industry. So I think that's the future where we need to move. But right now, this is very difficult because we're caught in the trying to, with competing interests within the general fund and trying to manage the real estate division and keep essentially a number of employees to be able to do the proper functions that we need to do.
Madam Chair, can I have a follow-up?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And Director Reynolds, thank you for that, because that actually segues me into my next question, because I was reading through the audit and I noticed, I saw from our notes what the budget was and other funds, but in the audit it outlines that in 2019 it looks like there was 14 million in revenues by the division, the real estate division, and I'm assuming that's mainly from fees. So there was 14 million in revenues but only 7 million in expenses. So my question was and this is more to help build my real estate division knowledge bank when it comes to the financing portion of it. What happens to the remainder of those revenues? Is that reverted back to the general fund?
Terry Reynolds, for the record, in some areas it goes straight into the general fund. And some of we were able to, I think in 2015, to take timeshare revenues and have those come in directly, and also map review that we did to have those come back into the department. But essentially the bulk of the revenue that we have that is not used for expenses goes right directly into the general fund. So it's not available for the real estate division.
Thank you, Director Reynolds. And Chair, if I could just follow up. I just want to make sure I understand the workings of the.
I appreciate the clarification. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And then so Director Reynolds, what portion of the fees that the division generates do you get to keep? And is there like a percentage and then everything else gets reverted to the general fund? Or do 100% of the fees that you collect go to the general fund and then you request general fund to fund your division?
I'm gonna let the administrator handle that, but essentially that is the case. We generate a considerable amount of revenues through the department, and then we get money back to be able to fund the division. So, but Sharaf, do you want to go through that?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I think these are really good questions, and really, I think there's a little bit of confusion here. So essentially, to keep it very simple, real estate revenue comes in, it's kind of bifurcated. So part of it goes straight to the general fund as revenue. And then part of it comes to the division, and we use that to balance our expenditures. And so this bifurcation happens where a steady stream of revenue that the agency generates goes straight to the general fund, and a mixed bag of revenue comes to the division, and then we balance our budget based on that stream of revenue. So again, very simply, licensing fees for real estate agents, everything goes straight to the general fund. Timeshares, and like the director said, some builder fees come to our fund, which is 3823, that's before you. And so if you look at the economy, the timeshare industry shut down. So all timeshare licensees that came through the division, we lost about 50% of that. And also timeshare companies that would register new timeshares stopped. And so that revenue shrunk. So suddenly you've got an agency that is dependent on that stream of revenue where 50% of that goes down. And so that's kind of the challenge that we faced. And so that revenue is balanced against our expenditures. So again, very simply, for every dollar, we only spend 50 cents. is approximately how I would say.
Okay, and then just my last question, and I just have a few questions just because this is the industry I come from, my husband being in real estate and me being entitled in escrow, I'm just curious, but, and so I do have one last question regarding the audit, and just because we're in a situation where every dollar counts, and I just want to know what you're doing to address this, but I read through the audit and it indicated that there was one thing that had consistently been reported or recommended for the last 3 audits that you guys have received. And so it looks like you get an audit every 10 years, and it was the collection of past due accounts. And we're in a position right now where every dollar counts. And I know the auditor kind of indicated that you guys weren't actively pursuing past due accounts. So what have you guys done to fix that?
Thank you, Vice Chair. So the collections has been a challenge, but it's not really the collection, but just the process. And we've worked with B&I to establish a better process. But really, the way collections works for the division is, if the commission fines against a licensee or a fine, then the fine is paid, and then that's only when the licensee gets reinstated or is able to continue with their license. So at that level, the collection is very good. There's only these cases where a licensee creates such a bad record that there's a significant amount of fine where then they don't, they leave the industry. And so really that's where those don't get repaid. Then that goes into a collection process. But the chances of that ever getting collected are minimal. But that process is a little convoluted, and we've taken steps to remedy that. Essentially, notices are sent out, then it's sent into the director's office, that then sends out a notice or information, and then when it's not collected, it goes to the treasurer's office. And that connection has always been a little shaky, just because B&I has evolved over time. We used to have accounting in-house, and then it was consolidated, and all the divisions processes were consolidated. And so some of that breakdown was there, and we've worked on it. And the other piece was the technology, us being able to account for those, pass it over to their office, and them able to interface with the with the treasurer's office. Those are the things that process improvement and the technology will help. But really, from the collection perspective for the division, if you're a licensee and you're fined, then you either have a suspended license or have to reinstate after you pay the fine. So the collection on that is very good. So we've not had a lot of issues on the front end, but the larger amounts is always a challenge.
Thank you for that explanation. I appreciate it. And thank you so much, Chair, for indulging all my questions. I appreciate the time.
Oh, there are enough of us who are new on the committee and new to these budgets. I really appreciate your depth of questions and clarification on some of these areas that are more technical and how the budget is managed. I do want to move on to questions for the next budget, though, and I believe Vice Chair Howdy also has questions on this budget, but I'm gonna start with Senator Dennis with his questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to ask about the database. So let me make sure I get to the right place. In E551, talk about I think you alluded to it in your presentation, but the anticipated benefits and efficiencies of the recommended integrated licensing system, how it's going to help you manage workload, recommended staffing levels for the upcoming biennium.
Thank you, Senator Dennis. Sharat Chandra, Administrator for the Real Estate Division. And so I think the technology, especially when it comes to licensing, is so critical. It's almost like the heart of what we do. And so having a database where licensees' information can be stored properly, education, because as you know, sir, education is a big component. And so, there's continuing education, there's pre-licensing education, there's, post-licensing, and then there's continuing education. And so the 36 hours, all those have to be tracked. They have to be matched against, each licensee at the renewal period. Any Compliance issues have to be also in that database. And so having something that's a little more flexible. And the biggest thing is this pandemic has exposed a lot of the issues that we've had, which is being able to do this online. Within the limited circumstances, we've turned on everything to try to push this online. But, some of the, issues have been folks are not comfortable with the online because the system is not fully integrated. Certain licensees can renew online. Certain folks have to turn in a lot of that stuff. And so a database that can account for that is simpler to use, even just as simple as if you're a new applicant, you could go on there and see the progress of your application received, processed, or ready to go. Something as simple as that would greatly benefit folks. And even if you're renewing, uploading, the ability to upload documents, ability to just reference certain things, connecting the education certificates to the license, and so you not have to bring everything in manually, those kind of things. So now everything's in the mail, we've got to process it, and also even ease of payment, just things like that would greatly enhance it. And what we did was, before we even thought about this database, we did a whole study. We have a document from an expert that breaks down all the areas of challenges and anticipated improvements. So we have a document. We kind of know where the issues are, and we know the technology fixes that will help. So essentially, a database is at this point critical. I think we've been limping along, but I think at some point the wheels are going to start falling off.
So when you mentioned the one part that you had me sold on that part, only because when I take CE classes, having to keep track of it manually and then physically having to take it to the office as opposed to being able to do it electronically, I think there's a lot of agents that will appreciate that because that's when you're taking CE, you've got to keep track of all of that, and then you got to physically take a piece of paper. And so I think I think we need to move into the 21st century with our technology for real estate. So do you anticipate the database that you're going to use, do you anticipate using an off-the-shelf solution?
So the goal is to create something that's scalable and also, used with mobile applications, something that's doesn't have to be custom built, because the issues have always been you have these custom builds with these workarounds and they're antiquated and you need special programmers for this. So hopefully we're going to something that's a little more modern and almost like Lego blocks, so you could kind of build out each piece and then they would all fit in, because there's compliance, there's audits, there's licensing, there's education, so you could build all these and then they could just slot in. That's the vision. And I think also if we do change vendors, the raw data is available in a format that can just be shifted onto a new vendor, so something like that, so it doesn't disrupt operations. We don't have to take everything down and rebuild from scratch. There are certain challenges, of course, because of the way the division is. We've got timeshares, we've got projects, we've got builders. There are specific things that, of course, you need to get in a little more detail in the software. But really, the goal is to do something that's more streamlined and also we can implement much quicker.
So do you have something specific in mind as far as, is there something that other states are using as far as software? And
there are some really good examples out there, some companies that have jumped in, but again, we'd have to go through an RFP. We have put everything together. Now it's a matter of going through the process, putting out an RFP, seeing what's out there. We're open to different funding business models, so we'll put some options out there. But again, at the end of the day, it has to be a public process and, see what's out there, and then we'll make a decision based on that.
Do you anticipate that you're going to go with something that will have an annual maintenance fee or licensing fee, and then have late maintenance fees on top of that? Is that what you're expecting?
Senator Dennis Chandra, Administrator for the Real Estate Division. That's an excellent question. I have thought about that more like a Microsoft 365 where, the company takes on the liability of building it out, but then we go on an annual maintenance contract that supports and then offers the updates and everything. Though that's a model that I believe will really work in this case. So you don't have an upfront cost. You do have some upfront cost to set it up, but then you transfer a lot of the costs on the annual renewal. That's a model. It's still hasn't got a lot of traction. Some of the other companies are traditional. So we'll put both options out, but we definitely have to have a base because it does take a significant amount of resources on the front end to get something going. But also there's cloud hosting, there's storage, there's updates. And that's where the challenge has always been, is because you could build something out, but if they're not being updated or not being improved, you're going to get stuck at the same position where now you've got to pay for those upgrades. So we're happy to look at some options, but ideally, yes, that would be one avenue.
So it sounds like you're still in researching phase of this, because when you go out for an RFP, you're going to have to be specific in what you're looking for, right?
Yes, sir. What we propose to do is we have a traditional model, and then also we're open to other funding models that, again, we don't want to create something that's not out there. We just want to make sure that we solicit information so we can make that decision. The companies are free to submit whatever their business model is. We're not advocating for one way or the other, and we'll review it all the same. And if one works better than the other, then we're open to that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I appreciate the division's interest in that transparency piece and public input piece or public process piece. I also want to caution to just ensure we're taking a look at proprietary information that comes out of any off-the-shelf tech that we buy. It's common practice to create outputs that are proprietary, and that just puts us in a struggle when it comes to if we have to transition into a different program later on. Okay, so are there other questions? I know I have Vice Chair in the queue. Want to make sure I'm not missing anybody. All right, I'm going to move on to Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Director Reynolds and Administrator Chandra. I have a few questions again, so thank you. I want to start with the elimination of the 2 positions in the education and research budget. So I noticed that the governor's recommended budget recommended eliminating the positions, but like from our discussions today, we've heard throughout the presentations about how understaffed the real estate division is. So was there any conversations with the governor's office about maybe holding the positions vacant instead of eliminating them? And if they are eliminated, is that enough for you guys to kind of regain financial stability?
This is Terry Reynolds, Director for Division or for BNI, and Sharath can also add into this. But there was discussion about that, and we were able to transfer those individuals into other vacant positions, or we had position people left and went on to other areas. But simply, we're in a position where we may have to reinstate that, or we look at what position that would benefit the division. So we may upgrade a position, or we need to have some flexibility. And I think, given the status of where we're at with a lot of these budget cuts, we may be coming back and requesting the addition of a position, or the inclusion of upgrading a position to be able to be filled. So, we're in that difficult circumstances where those were eliminated. Should they be held and not funded? That's probably preferable in that, but I'll let Sharath go through and discuss that.
Thank you, Director Reynolds. Sharath Chandra, Administrator for the Real Estate Division. I think we've discussed this again, like Director Reynolds said. I think the challenge has always been because of education, because of the volume that we do. Senator Dennis knows this also. We went from 24 to 36 hours. We increased the pre-licensing requirements from 90 to 120 hours. And we have also post-licensing requirements. And also we've got about 800 educators out there, about 800 courses that they submit annually that have to be reviewed, their audits to be done, course manuals to be produced, newsletters. So there's a whole host of things that this section does. Also, this section monitors the mailbox, is also kind of the central place to answer phone calls, questions. A lot of the realtors have questions about their education, where to take, what to take, how much to take. Some of this is handled by licensing, but again, education is a key. So, it's a rock and a hard place. We would like to see a position maybe come back, but also if you see there, I have a request for some software. Again, this is to streamline the education process a little bit more, being able to get those documents, the education packets back in a more streamlined way, to process them more streamlined, to upload certificates more streamlined, because the process, and I don't want to get into the details too much, but really educators provide education, then there's a certificate that's given to the licensee that accounts for their continuing education, and that has to be uploaded and integrated to the licensing system. So anything to take away the manual process will save a lot of workload for folks that then we can focus on other areas. But really a combination of technology and, again, there's no substitute for good folks in the state, and our folks are incredible, but they're stretched so thin. So any help would be good. It's one of those situations where having two positions will put us in the red because of the way the model is set up. But if we can, like Director Reynolds said, get one back, well, we'd greatly appreciate it.
So what I heard was if the positions were eliminated, you guys would still come back in the future and request one back. And correct?
Terry Reynolds, for the record, that is correct.
Okay. And then just with staying in that, Director Reynolds, you had mentioned that the positions were transferred, but I was under the impression that those positions had been vacant since the beginning of 2020. And so originally there were 6 positions, but those positions had been vacant. So there's only been 4 people in that department doing the work. And you guys have had to borrow from the real estate administration's budget personnel from there to help kind of fill the backlog of work or help with the workload. Is that what you guys are currently doing and you think you will do if these positions are eliminated? Will you guys continue to borrow personnel from the administration budget?
Terry Reynolds, for the record, the first part of that is, yes, they were vacant, and then some of them we were able to move a person over to another vacant position to fill in, but I'll have Sharath answer that. But essentially, yes, we're going to have to work and borrow within the division to meet the requirements until we get the software going, but we're still going to be short people.
Thank you, Director Reynolds. Sharath Chandra, Administrator for the Real Estate Division. Yes, that's correct. I think it's kind of those positions were filled, then there was some turnover, they were filled again, and then there was another round of turnovers. So essentially, for the majority of since the pandemic, those positions have been vacant. And of course, current staff have been filling those roles. And if those don't come back, then I think we're going to continue to do that. It is definitely going to impact. We definitely have to take a hard look once we come back to normal and we get back to a process. We've got to really think about what is it that we do? How are we doing this? Is there things that we can kind of shed? Which is a shame because at this point, we've tried to listen to what the industry needs. And we believe we've kind of created a very streamlined model of processing, approving, reviewing, but then we'll have to take a hard look at that. Hopefully technology helps, but definitely it's challenging with 4 people. That's a 33% cut to a 6-person group. And so yes, we will, there's a huge mail process that's involved because we don't have a northern office. And so everything's processed in the south. So all those realtors, about 20% of the 40,000 are up north. And so they have to mail in everything here. And so that creates a lot of mail. And so we process the mail, we go through everything, and then, that then goes to licensing and being processed. So it's a huge manual process. And this group does a significant amount of that. And so reduction there would also cause some challenges. And so that's really where we are in.
Thank you, Mr. Chandra and Director Reynolds. Madam Chair, if I can, I want to follow up for the fee portion.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And then I was just really surprised at how the education portion of this division is funded with the surplus of what's left over in the recovery account. And so I had a couple of questions regarding this. So I know, the Real Estate Education Research and Recovery Fund is in charge of doing all of the education, the continuing education and stuff, but you charge for the classes, the continuing education classes, correct? So do you not get to keep the fees that are collected from the continuing education classes? And with that, I know that the money you get for the education fund comes from the recovery account, and the recovery account is funded through a portion of application fees and renewal fees. So could you, are they solely funded through fees collected from brokers and real estate salespersons and not by fees collected for any of the other licenses like property management, timeshare, builders? Because do you also provide continuing education for them? I know that was a lot.
That is a lot. Shrath Chandra, Administrator for the Real Estate Division. So just we'll talk about that first part. So there is that education recovery account. $40 of every renewal license goes towards that. So every 2-year cycle, $40 is set aside. It goes into this account, which is used to pay out if there were any issues that came up for reimbursement. And there's an entire process for that. You go through small claims court, you get a judgment, you come and claim against this fund. And so that fund has about $300,000 that has to be set aside, and then about $150,000 in budgetary account that's set aside to pay out these claims. Anything over that's collected goes into this education recovery, education research account. And that's what funds the operations of this group. This group they provide some education, but most of the time we outsource, for lack of a better word, to the educators and the professionals out there. So they develop the courses. What we do is we review the courses and we approve them, we provide a number, and we also annually renew those courses. And so the revenue that we generate with that doesn't stay with us, it goes to the general fund. So really the only way that this group operates is through the excess money that's collected at that account, and then that is moved into this account that funds these folks. And so again, if there is a problem in the economy and there's a drop in the licensing amounts, that will coincide with the drop in the revenue that goes into that special fund, which in turn will reduce the money that comes into this account. And if there are a lot of claims, because the economy improves, there's some fraud, there's issues there, then again, if that money is being used to pay out claims, then that reduces the amount of money that's available to get transferred into this account. So that is kind of the breakout of that process.
So really the only way for you guys to increase your budget is to increase the portion of the fees that you collect, or increase the portion of the fees that go into the recovery account so that there's surplus there that could then go into the education fund.
Shrath Chandra, Administrator for the Real Estate Division. Yes, that is partially true. But again, we have to look at the larger picture. All these funds are bifurcated so much. But if there is, like the director explained earlier, if there is a move to self-funding, all those little barriers will be broken. It would just be, then it could be allocated accordingly. You don't have to increase one little area to fund one little area. It would just be across the board. The revenue can be then decided, doesn't have to sit in education. There would be a set aside to pay that recovery fund, and anything else can be used across the division, as opposed to right now, there's little pots of money here. A spot of money goes to the general fund, a pot of money stays in the division. And so a larger way to approach this would probably be the best way. But yes, essentially the only way to increase that is to increase the money that's set aside for the recovery fund.
Okay, thank you so much, Chair. I appreciate the time.
Thank you. That leaves us with some thought-provoking ideas. Are there any other questions on these budgets that I may have missed? I'm looking at gallery for hands waving. All right. I don't see any other questions. Unless Director Reynolds, you have any closing remarks?
Well, thank you very much, Terry Reynolds, for the record, Director for Business and Industry. I want to thank the committee. We, very good dialogue today, and I think you've gotten to the heart of kind of the issues within these budget accounts. So, in the real estate division is one of those that we have had multiple discussions with the industry, and to look at kind of where we're at with the financing of the agency and the viability to be able to do the things that we need to do to modernize and keep up with the real estate industry. And we've had significant discussions about self-funding and how we would approach that, but still keeping the general fund whole in terms of not taking away from that, but being able to adequately fund the real estate division. So you really have, discussion today is really part of that overall dialogue that we have had. So I thank you for those questions, because it really portrays what we're going through and what we need to really do in the future. So thank you.
Thank you, and we appreciate you all coming to present these budgets. With that, I will go ahead and close this part of the committee, and we can go ahead and move on to public comment. Broadcast, do we have folks in public comment? And just as a reminder, public comment is limited to 2 minutes per caller.
Chair, the public line is open and working. However, there are no callers at this time.
All right, well, let's give it a minute or so for folks to call in if they're watching and check back in. Broadcast, do we have any callers?
No, Madam Chair, the public line is open and working. However, there are still no callers at this time.
All right, well, thank you. And I want to thank the committee, the subcommittee, for your attention and questions this morning. Appreciate you being here with us. With that, we are adjourned.